They gave her to me as a reward. The Apache frontier woman clung to my leg and wouldn't let go. The sun was just starting to set over the vast Apache frontier, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The desert stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant hills and the occasional scattering of cacti. In this remote land, life was harsh, and every day demanded strength, courage, and careful attention. The wind carried whispers of danger from the unsettled territories, and travelers knew that one wrong step could be fatal. Yet in this unforgiving land, a young man named Samuel had carved a small place for himself. He was a rancher by trade, but he had also become a trusted helper for the local settlers, scouts, and sometimes even for the Apache themselves. People spoke of him as dependable and fair, someone who could be counted on when trouble came knocking. On this particular evening, Samuel had returned from a long ride across the plains. He had been helping a small group of settlers transport supplies through a rocky pass, a task that was more dangerous than it seemed. Bandits and wild animals were a constant threat, and navigating through unfamiliar territory required both courage and sharp instincts. Samuel had proven himself many times before, guiding people safely through the treacherous paths and even negotiating with some of the Apache scouts to ensure peaceful passage. Today had been no different. Though the sun was fading, his horse was steady and the pack animals had followed him without incident. As he approached the small outpost that marked the edge of settlement territory, Samuel noticed a quiet gathering. A few settlers and a couple of Apache elders were standing near a wooden corral, talking in low voices. Their gestures were calm but deliberate, suggesting that something important was about to happen. Curious, Samuel slowed his horse and watched. One of the Apache elders stepped forward and gestured for him to dismount. He obeyed, feeling the familiar tension of being on the edge of two worlds, the settler world he belonged to and the Apache lands that stretched beyond the horizon. The elder, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless stories, spoke to Samuel in halting English mixed with his native tongue. He explained that Samuel had helped the Apache in a difficult negotiation with a rival group the week before, and that his efforts had not gone unnoticed. Samuel listened carefully, trying to understand every word. He had always treated the Apache with respect, but he had never imagined that his actions could have such a direct impact. The elder nodded at the others, and they began to step aside, revealing a young Apache woman standing quietly in the shadows of the corral. She was no more than 16 or 17, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed both cautious and curious. Her hair was long and black, falling over her shoulders in loose waves. She wore simple clothing made from soft animal hide, practical for life on the frontier, but also showing signs of care from someone who understood her role in this moment. Samuel felt a sudden jolt of surprise and uncertainty. He had expected perhaps words of thanks or a small token, but nothing like this. The elder's voice, calm and deliberate, explained that she was being given to him as a reward, a sign of respect for his bravery and fairness. The young woman, however, did not speak. Instead, she slowly stepped forward, her bare feet crunching softly on the dusty ground. And then, to Samuel's astonishment, she did something he did not expect. She knelt and clung to his leg. Her grip was firm, almost desperate, and her eyes looked up at him with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. She would not let go, even when he tried to gently encourage her to stand. Samuel froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. In his mind, he had faced dangerous animals, harsh storms, and even armed men, but nothing had prepared him for this. He looked around at the elders, who simply nodded, their expressions serious. There was no malice in the woman's eyes, only trust and a deep unspoken plea. He realized then that this was not just a simple reward. It was a responsibility, one that demanded care, patience, and understanding. He lowered himself slowly to her level, speaking softly. "It's all right. You don't have to be afraid." The woman's eyes widened at the sound of his voice, and she tightened her grip for just a moment before loosening slightly. Samuel noticed that her hands were small but strong, and there was a quiet determination in her posture. She was not a helpless child, but someone who had learned early that the world was dangerous and that safety was rare. The elder stepped forward again, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. She is strong. She is careful. She knows the land and its dangers. Treat her with respect, he said. Samuel nodded, understanding the weight of the words. The frontier was not a place for carelessness, and anyone who lived here had to survive by using every skill they possessed. This young woman had survived, and now, in some way, her survival had become intertwined with his. As the sun sank below the horizon, the temperature dropped quickly. Samuel offered the woman his coat, which she accepted hesitantly. He led her to his horse, helping her climb into the saddle with careful hands. She sat stiffly at first, her eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to every sound. Samuel understood that this was her way of adjusting to a new world, one that was unfamiliar and possibly frightening. He guided his horse slowly toward his small cabin near the outpost, aware of the strange mix of feelings stirring within him. Responsibility, curiosity, and a cautious hope. The journey back was quiet, filled only with the sound of hooves against hard earth and the occasional rustle of the wind through sparse brush. Samuel spoke gently, asking her name and simple questions about where she had come from. She responded in broken English at first, but gradually her words became clearer. Her name was Lila, and though she had lived her life on the frontier, she had learned enough to understand that this was a moment of change. She clung to Samuel's leg even when she was seated on the horse, a physical sign of trust and the need for safety. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fully fallen, and the stars glittered above like distant fires. Samuel led Lila inside, offering her food and water. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him, as if she were measuring whether he was truly someone she could rely on. He watched her carefully, noting her movements, her quiet strength, and the way she observed everything around her. It was clear she had learned to survive by watching closely, listening intently, and acting decisively when necessary. That night, as the wind howled outside and the desert seemed more immense and lonely than ever, Samuel realized that this reward was unlike anything he had ever expected. It was not merely a token of gratitude. It was a living reminder of the responsibilities and connections that define life on the frontier. He understood that his role was no longer just his own. He had to consider Lila's safety, comfort, and well-being in every decision he made. And as he settled down near the fire, watching her finally rest, he felt a sense of quiet determination. He would protect her, guide her, and earn her trust, not because he had been given her, but because he now recognized the value of partnership in a world that offered few certainties. Outside, the desert night stretched on endlessly, and the stars watched silently as two lives became intertwined. The Apache frontier had tested many, and it would test them too, but in this moment there was a fragile peace, a tentative bond that promised growth, understanding, and the quiet courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Lila clung to Samuel's leg one last time before she finally relaxed, and in that simple act he felt a connection deeper than words could capture. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, a journey that would teach them the true meaning of trust, respect, and survival in a world where both were rare treasures. The next morning, the desert sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The air was dry but crisp, and the wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush. Samuel woke early as he always did, checking on his small ranch and making sure the animals were safe. Lila, the young Apache woman who had clung to him the previous evening, was already awake. She sat near the fire, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as though reading some hidden secret in the land itself. Samuel watched her quietly, realizing more with each passing moment how different her world had been from his own. She had grown up in the frontier, where every day required vigilance and courage, and now she was slowly learning to navigate his world, one small gesture at a time. Breakfast was simple: bread, a bit of dried meat, and fresh water, but it marked the first moment of shared routine between them. Lila moved carefully, respecting Samuel's space but staying close enough that he could feel the trust she was slowly offering. Her eyes met his once, then lowered shyly, and Samuel understood that this was her way of measuring the safety of her new surroundings. He spoke gently as he offered her a piece of bread. "Here, eat. You must have traveled far yesterday." She took it with small hands, nodding slightly, and for a brief moment, Samuel saw a flicker of relief in her expression. The day stretched ahead with work to do. Samuel needed to check on the fences, the livestock, and the small garden he had cultivated. Lila followed him, moving with surprising agility over the rocky ground. He noticed how carefully she observed everything, the subtle changes in the earth, the rustling of the wind through the trees, even the quiet movements of birds above. Samuel realized that she was learning fast and that her presence was already making life easier, not just because of what she could do, but because of the way she saw the world, paying attention to details he might overlook. As they worked together, Samuel tried to bridge the gap between their worlds. He asked her about her life before she had come to him, about her family, and about how she had learned to survive in such a harsh land. Lila responded slowly at first, her words measured, but gradually she began to speak more freely. She told him about the long rides across the plains, the small camps where she and others had found temporary safety, and the careful watchfulness required to avoid danger. Samuel listened with patience, understanding that every story she told was a small thread of trust being woven between them. By mid-morning the sun had climbed higher, and the heat began to press down on them. Samuel suggested they take a break near the small creek that ran behind the cabin. The water was shallow but clear, glimmering in the sunlight. Lila knelt by the edge, cupping her hands to drink, and Samuel watched as she dipped her fingers into the water to wash her face. There was something almost magical about the simplicity of the moment. A young woman from a world so different, finding relief and comfort in the same way he did. It reminded him that despite differences in upbringing and culture, some experiences were universal: the need for water, the need for safety, the need to feel understood. Over the next few hours, Samuel began to teach Lila some of the skills he used daily. He showed her how to check the fences for weak spots, how to lead a horse calmly, and how to notice subtle signs in the land that indicated approaching weather changes. Lila learned quickly, absorbing the information with quiet determination. She asked questions, sometimes hesitating, sometimes boldly, and Samuel admired her curiosity. There was a resilience in her that he had not expected, a mixture of fear and courage that reminded him of the wild frontier itself. Despite the lessons, it was clear that Lila had her own way of doing things. She moved with a grace that was natural, almost instinctive, and often surprised Samuel by noticing dangers he had overlooked: a sudden rustle in the brush, a faint imprint of an animal on the ground, or the smell of smoke on the wind. She noticed them all. Samuel began to realize that the reward he had received the day before was not just a symbol or a token. Lila brought knowledge, intuition, and awareness that was invaluable in a place where the land itself could be unforgiving. By late afternoon, Samuel decided they would take a short ride toward the nearby ridge to scout the land. The path was narrow and rocky, requiring careful navigation, but Lila followed without hesitation. Her grip on the horse's reins was steady, her eyes alert to every movement in the terrain. Samuel felt a sense of pride mixed with caution. Pride in how capable she was, and caution because the frontier was always unpredictable. They reached the ridge just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, and the view was breathtaking. The desert stretched endlessly, painted in shades of gold and crimson, and the wind carried with it a faint sense of freedom, danger, and possibility all at once. They stayed there for a while, speaking little but sharing a silent understanding. Samuel realized that Lila's presence was changing the way he saw the world. He was more aware, more careful, and more patient. Her trust in him, expressed through simple gestures like clinging to his leg or staying close during difficult moments, had made him see the value of responsibility in a new light. The frontier was not just about survival, it was about connection, understanding, and mutual respect. On their way back, a sudden movement in the brush startled them. Samuel tensed immediately, scanning the area, but Lila's calm reaction surprised him. She gestured for him to stay quiet and pointed toward a small group of wild goats moving through the rocks. Her eyes were sharp, reading the subtle cues in the terrain that indicated life and movement. Samuel felt a quiet admiration. She had adapted quickly not only to his world but also to the rhythm of the land itself. In that moment, he understood that survival here was not just about strength or skill. It was about perception, awareness, and trust. Back at the cabin, the evening routine began. Samuel prepared a small meal while Lila helped with simple tasks. They shared stories, sometimes laughing quietly at small mistakes or misunderstandings. Lila began to teach Samuel some of her own knowledge: how to find edible plants, how to read subtle signs of animals in the wild, and even some basic words in her language. Samuel realized that learning from her was as valuable as teaching her. Their relationship was slowly shifting from a mere act of responsibility into a mutual partnership, where both were contributing and benefiting from each other's skills and experiences. Night fell, and the desert grew quiet, except for the occasional howl of a distant coyote. Samuel built a small fire, and they sat close to it, sharing warmth and a sense of companionship. Lila no longer clung to his leg constantly, but she stayed nearby, her eyes alert but calm. There was an unspoken understanding between them. He would protect her, and she would share her knowledge and trust in return. It was a fragile but growing bond, one that would need patience, care, and respect to fully flourish. As Samuel watched the stars appear one by one over the vast frontier, he felt a quiet sense of gratitude. He had come here to live a simple life, to work hard, and to carve out a place for himself. Instead, he had found something unexpected: a young woman whose presence challenged him, inspired him, and reminded him of the deeper values of trust, respect, and companionship. The desert was harsh, and the frontier could be unforgiving. But in this small cabin, with a fire flickering and a shared sense of purpose, Samuel knew that they were beginning a journey that neither of them had expected. For Lila, the day had been just as transformative. She had learned that Samuel was not like others she had met. He did not seek to control or command, but to understand and protect. His patience, careful teaching, and quiet strength gave her a sense of safety she had rarely known. She had clung to him initially out of fear and instinct, but now she remained close, out of choice, a silent expression of trust and growing respect. The bond between them was fragile, yes, but also real, built on shared experiences, mutual learning, and the recognition that each had something to offer the other in a world that often offered very little kindness. As the fire burned low, the night deepened, and the desert seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Samuel and Lila sat together in quiet reflection. The frontier was vast, unpredictable, and often unforgiving, but in this small corner of it, they had found a beginning. One shaped not by circumstances alone, but by patience, understanding, and the willingness to trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new experiences, but for tonight they could simply sit together, knowing that their journey had only just begun. And as the stars sparkled above, the young Apache woman finally relaxed completely, sitting near Samuel, with a calmness that spoke volumes. She no longer needed to cling so tightly. Her trust was growing, and the bond they were forming was beginning to take root. The frontier had given them a harsh world, but it had also given them an opportunity: the chance to learn from one another, to grow together, and to find companionship in a place where few things were guaranteed. The desert morning was quiet, almost too quiet. Samuel had woken early, as was his habit, but something in the air made him uneasy. The wind had changed direction overnight, carrying a faint scent that he could not immediately place. Lila, who had grown more confident in the past days, was already awake, her eyes scanning the horizon with practiced alertness. She had learned quickly that the frontier demanded constant attention, and her instincts were sharp. Samuel watched her carefully, noticing the small signs, the tilt of her head, the narrowing of her eyes, that told him she had sensed something unusual. They had planned to spend the day tending to the livestock and checking the fences along the northern ridge. The morning air was cool, and the sky was a deep, endless blue. Samuel packed a small satchel with water, food, and tools, while Lila helped gather supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, showing that she had already absorbed much of what Samuel had taught her. But today, her eyes flickered nervously toward the distant hills, and Samuel knew instinctively that she had sensed trouble long before it became visible. As they set out on horseback, the tension in the air became more apparent. The distant sounds of the desert, usually so predictable, the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, were muted. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lila rode close to Samuel, keeping her hand near the saddle horn, ready to react at a moment's notice. "Something's coming," she whispered, her voice low and steady. Samuel nodded, scanning the horizon. There in the distance he saw the faint movement of figures. Men on horseback, riding fast and with purpose. Their silhouettes were dark against the rising sun, and Samuel's heart tightened. "They're not settlers," he murmured, his voice quiet but firm. Lila's eyes met his, and he saw the silent agreement between them. They would face whatever came together. The figures grew closer, and Samuel recognized the danger immediately. Bandits had been roaming the outskirts of the territory, taking what they could and leaving chaos behind. Today, it seemed, their path had crossed the outpost and the small cabin where Samuel and Lila lived. Samuel guided their horses behind a ridge, using the terrain to stay hidden. Lila followed without hesitation, her movements smooth and deliberate. She had learned to read the land, to notice the subtle cues that indicated danger, and to act without panic. Samuel was impressed, not only by her skill but also by her calmness. Most people would have panicked at the sight of armed men approaching, but Lila's focus was steady, almost instinctive. They watched as the bandits rode past the ridge below, laughing and shouting carelessly, unaware of the pair above them. Samuel knew they could not stay hidden forever. Eventually they would have to act. He turned to Lila and whispered, "We need a plan." "Stay close and follow my lead." Lila nodded, her grip on the reins firm but relaxed. There was no fear in her movements now, only readiness. Samuel led their horses down a narrow path that wound through the rocks, carefully avoiding the open ground where the bandits could see them. He thought quickly, considering the few advantages they had. The high ground, the element of surprise, and Lila's knowledge of the terrain. As they approached a small clearing, Samuel dismounted and motioned for Lila to do the same. They crouched behind a large boulder, peering out at the path the bandits had taken. "They'll be back," Samuel said quietly. "We can't let them see us now, but we can slow them down." Lila nodded, her eyes sharp. Together, they moved quietly, using the rocks and sparse vegetation as cover. Samuel handed her a small slingshot he carried for emergencies. Lila's hands were steady as she took it, her face calm and determined. "Ready?" she whispered. Samuel gave a slight nod. The bandits returned sooner than expected, riding in a rough line down the path. Samuel waited until the lead rider was just within range, then gave Lila a subtle signal. She aimed carefully and released the stone. It struck the horse's flank, startling the animal and causing it to swerve. The rider lost balance, falling to the ground with a loud crash. The others pulled their mounts to a stop, shouting in confusion. Samuel seized the moment, climbing onto a higher rock to get a better vantage point. He threw a small rock at another rider, startling him just enough to create more confusion. Lila moved quickly, her eyes scanning for more threats. She spotted a narrow path that led behind the bandits' line, and without hesitation, she motioned for Samuel to follow. They moved swiftly but carefully, keeping their movements hidden. Samuel realized with growing respect that Lila was no longer the timid young woman who had clung to his leg days before. She was courageous, intelligent, and capable of quick thinking under pressure. Together, they were becoming a formidable team. As the bandits struggled to regain control of their horses, Samuel and Lila continued to move along the hidden path. They reached a point where they could create a small obstacle, rolling rocks into the narrow path ahead. Lila helped her small hands, surprisingly strong, as they pushed the stones into place. When the bandits finally tried to ride through, their path was blocked, and several horses stumbled. Chaos erupted among the group, giving Samuel and Lila the chance to retreat safely toward the cabin. By the time they returned, the outpost was on high alert. Settlers had seen the bandits in the distance and were preparing defenses. Samuel quickly secured the cabin and checked that all the animals were safe. Lila moved with him, helping to ensure that nothing had been overlooked. They worked silently, their bond strengthened by the shared danger and their combined efforts to protect what they cared about. After the immediate threat had passed, Samuel and Lila sat together near the fire, Both were exhausted, their clothes dusty and torn from the day's events, but there was a quiet satisfaction in their eyes. Samuel reached out and placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "You were amazing today," he said. She looked up at him, a faint smile breaking through her usual seriousness. "I learned from you," she replied simply, though her tone carried pride. The evening was calm, but the tension of the day lingered. Samuel knew that the frontier would continue to test them, that dangers were always present, and that trust and vigilance were essential. He also knew that Lila had proven herself not only capable of surviving, but of contributing in ways that were invaluable. Her courage had saved them both, and he felt a deep respect for her. Over the next few days, Samuel and Lila worked to strengthen their defenses. They reinforced the fences, set up simple alarms, and made small adjustments to the cabin to ensure safety. Lila's knowledge of the land proved useful once again. She could spot hidden dangers, find the safest routes, and anticipate changes in the weather. Samuel realized that he had underestimated her at first, assuming she would be fragile or overly cautious. Instead, she was intelligent, brave, and capable of thinking several steps ahead. Their partnership grew stronger with each passing day. Samuel taught Lila more about the skills he used daily: tending livestock, weeding the land, and using tools effectively. Lila in turn shared her own knowledge: how to find water in dry areas, how to read animal tracks, and how to move quietly and efficiently through the desert. Each lesson brought them closer, creating a bond built on trust, respect, and mutual dependence. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Samuel and Lila sat outside the cabin looking at the vast expanse before them. The day had been long, filled with small successes and careful planning, but they both felt a sense of accomplishment. Lila leaned slightly against Samuel, no longer clinging as she had in the beginning, but close enough that her presence was comforting. Samuel understood that this was a sign of trust, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together. The frontier was a harsh place, and danger would come again. Samuel knew that. But he also knew that he and Lila were stronger together. They had faced a threat, relied on each other, and come out not only unscathed but more confident in their abilities and in each other. The experience had changed them both, transforming fear into courage and uncertainty into a growing sense of partnership. As night fell and the stars appeared over the desert, Samuel felt a quiet sense of peace. He had come to the frontier seeking a simple life, but he had found something far more meaningful. Lila was no longer just a reward given to him. She was a partner, a teacher, and a friend. Their bond had been tested by danger and strengthened by trust, and Samuel knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Lila, too, reflected on the events of the past days. She had learned that Samuel was reliable, brave, and patient, someone she could depend on in the harshest conditions. The frontier had always been a place of uncertainty for her, but now, with Samuel by her side, she felt a sense of security she had rarely known. Her choice to stay close to him was no longer just instinct. It was a conscious decision, an acknowledgement of trust and respect that had grown from shared experiences and mutual care. The desert night was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of wind and distant animals. Samuel and Lila sat together side by side, their thoughts focused on the future and the challenges that would inevitably come. They knew that the frontier was unpredictable, that danger was always nearby, and that survival depended on vigilance and courage. But they also knew that they were no longer facing it alone. Together they had formed a partnership that was strong, resilient, and built on trust. And as the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Samuel and Lila understood something fundamental. The frontier was not just a place of survival, but a place of growth, learning, and connection. They had faced danger and uncertainty, relied on each other, and discovered strength they had not known they possessed. The journey ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together, prepared, confident, and bound by a bond forged in courage, trust, and mutual respect. The morning sun rose slowly over the Apache frontier, casting long golden rays across the desert. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. After the challenges of the past days, Samuel felt a quiet sense of determination. He had faced danger, learned to rely on Lila, and discovered her strength and courage. Today would be different. Today was about preparation, trust, and understanding that the bond they had formed was more than just circumstance. Lila was already awake when Samuel stepped outside. She stood near the cabin, looking out over the open plains with a calm, focused expression. Gone was the nervousness she had first shown when she clung to his leg. Now she moved with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her eyes alert to every sound. Samuel admired her silently. He had seen her courage in action, her sharp instincts, and her willingness to adapt and learn. She was no longer just the girl who had been given to him as a reward. She was a partner, someone who could think, act, and survive alongside him. Their morning began with routine work, checking fences, tending livestock, and inspecting the small garden that provided much of their food. They worked efficiently, communicating through gestures, brief words, and the subtle understanding that had grown between them. Samuel noticed how careful Lila was, not only in her work but in watching him, learning from his movements, and anticipating problems before they arose. It was clear that she had grown beyond the role of a newcomer. She was now an essential part of life on the frontier, someone whose skills and knowledge were invaluable. By mid-morning, Samuel suggested they take a ride to scout the surrounding land. The recent threat from bandits had reminded him that the frontier was unpredictable, and being prepared was essential. Lila agreed without hesitation, her eyes lighting up with determination. As they rode, Samuel observed how she handled her horse, her hands steady on the reins, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. He felt a surge of pride and respect. She was no longer just someone he had to protect. She had become a protector in her own right. They reached a ridge that overlooked a wide expanse of desert. The view was breathtaking, with layers of hills and valleys stretching as far as the eye could see. Samuel dismounted and led Lila to a flat rock where they could sit and rest. The wind carried a faint warmth, and the silence of the morning felt like a gift after the chaos of the past week. Samuel turned to Lila and spoke quietly. "You've changed so much in just a few days. I can't believe how brave and skilled you've become." Lila looked at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I learned from you," she replied simply. But Samuel knew it was more than that. She had learned, adapted, and grown in ways that were uniquely her own. As they sat together, Samuel began to speak of the future. "The frontier is harsh," he said. "We'll face challenges, storms, and dangers we can't always predict. But I know we can face them together." Lila nodded, her expression serious. She understood what he meant. Trust and partnership were essential here. And though she had started her journey clinging to his leg out of fear, she now stayed by his side by choice, knowing that they were stronger. Together, the day passed with small tasks and careful preparation. They repaired fences, checked traps for small animals, and reinforced the cabin against possible threats. Lila proved invaluable, her knowledge of the land allowing them to anticipate problems and act quickly. She showed Samuel how to find water in unexpected places, how to notice the subtle signs of approaching weather, and how to move quietly and efficiently when danger was near. Samuel realized that their bond had grown stronger not just through words, but through shared experiences, mutual learning, and the trust they placed in each other. By evening, a new challenge presented itself. A small group of travelers arrived at the outpost, weary from a long journey across the desert. They were friendly, but their arrival reminded Samuel and Lila that the frontier was always unpredictable. The travelers were seeking food and shelter, and Samuel welcomed them cautiously, knowing that hospitality was important, but that safety came first. Lila observed quietly, helping to prepare a simple meal while keeping an eye on the newcomers. Her presence reassured Samuel. Together, they handled the situation calmly and effectively, ensuring everyone was safe and cared for. After the travelers had rested and moved on, Samuel and Lila returned to the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. They sat near the fire, sharing a quiet meal and reflecting on the day. Lila no longer clung to Samuel, as she had in the beginning. Instead, she sat close, her presence comforting and steady. Samuel realized that this was a sign of trust, a trust that had been earned through shared experiences, respect, and understanding. As night fell, the stars appeared, bright and countless in the clear desert sky. Samuel and Lila sat together watching the constellations, feeling the vastness of the world around them. The frontier was unpredictable, but in this moment, they felt a sense of peace. They had faced danger, learned from each other, and grown stronger together. Their bond was no longer just a matter of circumstance. It was a partnership built on respect, courage, and trust. In the days that followed, life on the frontier settled into a rhythm. Samuel and Lila continued their work, tending livestock, maintaining the cabin, and exploring the surrounding land. Each day brought new lessons and challenges, but they faced them together. Lila's confidence grew, and she began to take initiative in ways that surprised even Samuel. She would suggest improvements, anticipate problems, and act quickly when needed. Samuel felt a deep sense of pride and admiration. She had transformed from someone who clung to him out of fear into a capable, brave, and intelligent partner. Their relationship continued to deepen, not through words alone, but through shared experiences. They learned to rely on each other, to anticipate each other's needs, and to communicate without speaking. The trust between them became unspoken but undeniable. Samuel realized that the reward he had received, the young woman given to him, was not just a gesture of respect from the Apache elders. She was a gift of partnership, courage, and loyalty, someone who had become essential to his life on the frontier. One evening after a long day of work, Samuel and Lila sat outside the cabin watching the sun dip below the horizon. The desert was quiet, the air cool, and the stars beginning to twinkle above. Lila leaned slightly against Samuel, her presence calm and comforting. She no longer needed to cling to him for security. Her trust was full and complete. Samuel understood that their journey had changed both of them. They had faced danger, relied on each other, and learned the value of partnership in a world where trust was rare and precious. As they sat together, Samuel spoke softly. "The frontier is harsh, but with you by my side, I feel like we can face anything." Lila looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sunset. "I feel the same," she replied. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, only the quiet confidence that comes from knowing someone truly cares for and respects you. The night grew deeper, but Samuel and Lila remained near the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. They talked about their pasts, their experiences, and the lessons they had learned. They spoke of the challenges ahead and the ways they would face them together. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but they no longer faced it alone. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life on the frontier continued. Samuel and Lila worked together, exploring new areas, tending the land, and building a life that was both challenging and rewarding. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Samuel often reflected on how much had changed since the day she had first clung to his leg. She had grown in courage, confidence, and independence, while he had learned patience, trust, and the true meaning of partnership. The frontier had tested them, and they had risen to the challenge together. Bandits, storms, and the harshness of the land had proven no match for their courage, intelligence, and mutual support. They had learned to anticipate danger, to act decisively, and to rely on each other in ways that went beyond words. Their partnership had become a source of strength, a foundation for life in a world that was often unpredictable and unforgiving. In the quiet moments of the evening, Samuel would often look at Lila and marvel at how far they had come. She was no longer the timid girl who had clung to him in fear, but a brave, capable, and intelligent young woman who had chosen to stay by his side out of trust and respect. She had become his partner, his equal, and someone he could rely on in every way. And as the stars shone above the desert, Samuel and Lila knew that their journey was only beginning. The frontier would continue to test them, but together, they were ready. They had faced danger, learned from each other, and built a bond that could not easily be broken. The Apache woman who had once clung to Samuel's leg now stood beside him as an equal, a partner, and a friend. Their journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had grown into trust, respect, and the quiet strength of partnership. The desert night was still, the fire flickering softly, and the stars casting their light over the vast landscape. Samuel and Lila sat together side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The frontier was harsh, but they were stronger together, bound by trust, courage, and the unspoken understanding that comes from sharing both danger and companionship. In the quiet of the desert night, their journey had reached a new beginning, one filled with hope, resilience, and the enduring strength of partnership.